A new proposal from the USDA would allow sunscreens in the U.S. to include an active ingredient already commonly used in other countries. It's supposed to protect you from both ultraviolet and A and B rays.
This is top of mind for so many Coloradans because we have a higher rate of skin cancer here. We're closer to the sun, right? We're on mile high. So 9 News medical expert Dr. Kohli is joining us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
So first, what is this ingredient?
Yeah, so bimotrizanol. It's an ingredient that's been around in Europe for over 20 years, and it's actually called the sunscreen of the future because it has best components of both the chemical and the mineral sunscreen. So there's two different types of sunscreens that we can normally use, and this particular component doesn't absorb as much into the skin, which is a good thing, but it does create that same sort of chemical protection. It's photostable, which means when it's exposed to the sun, it doesn't disintegrate, so it provides a more consistent protection. And like I said, because it's been in Europe for 20 years, we do believe it's quite safe. Now, what's interesting is that the FDA had actually seen this ingredient about 25 years ago in 2000, and they said, oh, we need more data on its safety before we can approve it. And then the manufacturers just ended up dropping the case. So now it's made a comeback.
Okay, so you mentioned the two different kinds of sunscreen, chemical and mineral. What's the difference?
Yeah, so it's very important, and I don't know which ones you guys use. I use mainly mineral, but there's advantages and disadvantages to both. So chemical sunscreen, if you think about it, it's more like the lotions and the creams. They absorb into the skin, and they actually absorb the UV and create heat. So you do have a little bit of systemic absorption of those types of sunscreens. That's your avobenzone, oxybenzone. On the other hand, the mineral sunscreens are more of that chalky texture. They don't absorb. They create a barrier which actually reflects the UV rays. And so for babies and people who have sensitive skin, that can be a really useful option. That's your zinc oxide, titanium dioxide.
The one that doesn't really blend in.
Ever.
Right? Yes.
Ever.
That's my problem. I would love to use mineral sunscreen, but with my dark skin, I mean, it looks like I've painted myself.
Well, and that's why we're talking about this new agent now, which kind of has the best of both. It's oil-based, so it absorbs really well, but because it's of its heavy weight, it doesn't absorb into the skin. So you don't get that chalkiness, but it's not necessarily getting in either, because we worry with the chemical sunscreens, there's been some data linked to hormonal disruptions of those. So that's why for babies and such and pregnant women, we suggest not using those.
It's for that very reason, though, that I like it for kids, because I can tell when
Yes.
it's not there anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
I do like it
That
for
makes
my
sense.
kiddos. Yes. So talk a little bit about why, they had so many years of studies in other countries, and then we talked about it 25 years ago, and they're like, we need more studies.
Yeah.
What was the holdup, really?
Well, it's all regulatory, so it's not based on safety or efficacy. So nothing about the chemical compound has changed. There's been no new data suggesting that it's not safe. And like I said, the safety has been established for a long time, but it really reflects a little bit of the FDA regulatory process here in the United States, with certain things like drugs and sunscreens and such can really get held up based on these regulatory barriers. So I'm happy that the FDA is now saying, let's think about this, because we're using it all over the world. It's a better sunscreen. It has a broader protection of UVA and UVB. Why are we not letting Americans use this? So this company in Switzerland has now filed the FDA to re-review this. Of course, this is an expensive process, and that's one of the reasons many companies have said, well, it's not worth our time to pursue it. But if it does make a comeback here, we probably will start seeing this in our sunscreens at the end of next year, 2026.
Wow.
Okay, interesting. Well, because we are getting into the wintertime when a lot of people think, oh, I don't need the sunscreen as much. I'm not, outside as much where it's cloudy. I'm a victim of this ignorance before. You can, in fact, still get a sunburn on a cloudy day.
100%. In fact, sometimes when it's cloudy, you have less ozone protection. You can get more UVA and UVB. And the way to remember the two types, UVA, A stands for aging, UVB, B stands for burning. And so both of them are damaging to our skin in different ways. You really want a broad spectrum sunscreen, even when it's sunny outside. My mom says this to me all the time, the sun's not out today, I'm not gonna wear sunscreen. No. And in fact, even if you're working in an office where you're sitting by a window, because most glass does not have UV protection. Even in our cars, the windshields usually do, but not necessarily the driver's side glass. That's why we have a lot of left-sided skin cancer here in Colorado as well.
I always think that with the top of the hands too, right? From driving, because the sun comes right through.
Well, and the places to think about putting it on your ears, in between your fingers and your toes, and on your lips. These are places.
What about in here?
And the scalp. That's
I always think about that one. Like, not my hair.
Just put it everywhere. Just dump it all over.
Less than the hair, it's the scalp. because the hair is just protein. It's not going to cause cancer out the hair, but the scalp is skin. It's a specialized skin underneath. So when we use those sprays that protect our hair, to me, that's not as important as the ones that actually can protect the scalp.
I just don't want the greasy stuff in my hair, but
Yeah,
I'm like,
well,
oh, okay.
I've got a lot more. I've got a lot more exposure to the sun up here than you do with all that hair on your head.
That's right.
Dr. Kohli, thank you so much. All right, let's get a check of your forecast now. Speaking of cloudy days, we're seeing some clouds out there, Katie.